plating or overreach on a health scare that might one day look a little bit silly, like maybe the meth scare and others, where people are too scared to speak out against all the arguments that we've got to spend huge sums upgrading water supplies all over New Zealand. It may be clearly for urban areas, but most of our water is used for, boiling or washing in the garden, flushing toilets, showers and stuff like that. Very little is used for drinking. And for many small communities, putting in hugely expensive water schemes, which is what they seem to be winding up to require, or even for farmhouses that have just got it off the roof with, possum droppings and everything else in it, you'd be far better to give everyone free bottles of water or a free service for refilling, because the drinking requirement is so small. And I say that it's like the meth scare because we may even find that it's a little bit like the science that's now coming out and saying you need bacteria in your gut, you need a constant supply of challenge to your immune system when you're young, if you don't want to have asthma. There's a whole lot of stuff coming out now about the normalcy of living with bacteria, and I'm concerned that New Zealand, right at the stage when the science might be changing, is about to force everyone into super expensive water supplies.
But what about the incidence of cryptosporidium and various other?
Well, that's in an urban area, and there's no excuse for that in an urban area. I'm much more concerned about small towns, places that would be uneconomic if they had to have water where, as long as you knew, you would just do like you do in many parts of the world. You'd drink bottled water, you'd wash your teeth with bottled water, but otherwise...
But that's sacrilegious. This is New Zealand. When we go overseas to third world countries, we don't drink the water, but this is New Zealand.
Well, we've done it. And what I'm saying is for the last 150 years, these places have had perfectly adequate water, but suddenly they're told that it's not. The water they've always had that we're told we can't keep having.
What would be the answer then? Because there is that issue of 1 in 5 New Zealanders are drinking water from suppliers that don't meet current standards.
It's saying the current standard is probably woefully over-engineered. Great for consultants, great for engineering companies, great for the suppliers, just like all the things that have turned New Zealand houses into 3 times the cost of a typical house in a more efficient country.
You'd change your mind if you had a family in Havelock North?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I grew up in a rural area. We knew that people who came to the area sometimes had tummy upsets when they first hit the water.
So you drank it?
We lived on it.
Yeah.
And most people do.
Mm.
Would chlorination be the leveller?
Well, chlorination is...
In your opinion?
Well, chlorination at most supplies are, and it may be, but if you've only got 5 or 10 houses in a settlement, it's going to be a very difficult thing to keep a system working. If people want to get it off their roof or get it out of the creek and do what they've always done, they should be allowed to.
All right, very, very, very interesting stuff. Hey, just finally, actually, no, not finally, to briefly, do either of you use Instagram? Because there are dangers with using Instagram. Stephen, briefly?
I've got an account, but I very rarely look at it.
Amanda?
Look, Instagram, I've got one, yes, I need to probably amp it, but no, I'm not prone to going up mountains and sitting on the edges of crevasses and doing all that stuff. Going to places that you shouldn't, taking photographs, to be even
Stephen.
better than the other one, you know? Ain't me.
Great to have you both on the show.
Thanks,
Amanda
Wallace.
Miller, Stephen Franks, fantastic. I'm Wallace, I'm back for the week, filling in for Jim Mora.
Totumare, hoa mai, he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, mounting calls for the police to formally investigate claims that Maori leader Te Awanui Arangi Black was a pedophile. We'll talk to Defence Minister Ron Mark about the $2.3 billion purchase of new maritime patrol craft with anti-submarine missiles. CNN's David McKenzie joins us from the caves in Thailand. British police launch a full-blown murder inquiry after a woman who was exposed to the nerve agent Novichok dies in hospital. Flooding kills dozens and sees more than 2 million people evacuated in Japan. And thousands of public servants walk off the job for 2 hours. All that and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and tēnei. The Air Force's ageing Orions in service since the 1960s are finally being replaced. The government has announced it's buying 4 new maritime patrol aircraft from the US government. The total cost of purchasing the Boeing Poseidons and putting them into service is estimated at $2.3 billion. The Defence Minister Ron Mark says the government did not take the decision lightly.
We questioned and analysed all of the options thoroughly ourselves. We did not rubber stamp the former government's homework. Maintaining maritime patrol capability is essential for New Zealand's national security and for our ability to contribute to global security efforts.
Ron Mark says the ability to work alongside Australia and the US was an important part of the decision. The Poseidons will begin operations from 2023. Calls are mounting for the police to fully investigate claims that a Tauranga Maori leader who died 2 years ago was a pedophile. The allegations were made by Te Awanuiarangi Black's widow, Anihira Black, in a Facebook video. Tauranga iwi, including Ngāti Pūkenga and Ngai Tarangi, are calling for a formal investigation. The police have so far said they're only seeking further information about the allegations. Ngai Tarangi's chief executive, Paora Stanley, says that's not enough.
The iwi's reaction is fully supportive of a police investigation. They're serious allegations.
Paora Stanley says the iwi is encouraging people to come forward if they have any information. One person has died in a forestry accident in Bulls. Emergency services were called after a tree fell on a car on a property in Pukeho Road just before 2:30 this afternoon. Another person has critical injuries and has been airlifted to Palmerston North Hospital. A third person was seriously injured. There's still no official word as to whether the operation to rescue the remaining 8 boys and their football coach from a cave in northern Thailand has resumed. 4 boys were rescued overnight, but the mission was suspended so divers could replace air tanks and supplies along the 4-kilometre route to the surface. CNN's David McKenzie reports preparations for the second phase of the operation are being made.
This international team of divers linked up with their Thai Navy SEAL counterparts will be submerging, arriving at those boys. They'll make the difficult decision, if it hasn't already been made yet, of which boys will go through today and which will have to stay if they follow the same pattern that they did yesterday, with 2 boys emerging kind of 10 minutes apart. 2 hours later, another 2 boys 10 minutes apart.
David McKenzie outside the Tamloan caves. Rescuers in Western Japan are digging through mud and rubble in a race to find survivors of floods and landslides that have killed nearly 100 people. Another 58 are listed as missing. It's the highest toll from a natural disaster in Japan since 98 people were killed in a typhoon in 2004. Rain is now easing in the areas battered by last week's downpour, but thousands of people remain cut off from power and water supplies. A health watchdog says it's unacceptable an elderly woman waited 19 days for an Auckland rest home to redress a painful leg wound. The Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner, Rose Wall, says Somerset by the Park breached patient rights by not acting sooner. She says the woman's injured right calf was looked after at first, but the dressing was not changed after 3 days as it was meant to be.
It seems it wasn't redressed for 19 days, and when the family took this elderly woman to her GP over 3 weeks after the incident, she was found to have an infection, and she was in considerable discomfort at the time as well, and had cellulitis.
Rose Wall says there was confusion over who was managing the wound, and the rest home provider has apologised. The Transport Minister Phil Twyford has had his responsibilities for the Civil Aviation Authority restored after being fined $500 by the authority for talking on his phone on a plane. He used the phone after the doors had closed on the plane about to depart from Wellington in May. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern stripped him of his responsibilities for the authority at the time. Mr Twyford says he apologises unreservedly and will pay the fine shortly. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says he discussed the matter with Ms Ardern over the weekend.
We agreed that it was a low-level offence and that the Minister's contrition and assurance he won't commit this offence again led us to decide to reinstate his ministerial responsibilities for the CAA.
The Acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the marquee signing for the New Zealand team set to make their entry into the Australian Baseball League is keen to help mentor the squad's younger players. Josh Colmenter, a pitcher who spent 7 seasons at Major League level in America, is one of the first 2 signings announced by what will be an Auckland-based franchise. The 32-year-old hopes to use that experience to help the more inexperienced members of the New Zealand team's roster.
With a lot of young guys that'll probably be on the team, you can kind of be in a player-mentor role. So I've been on both sides of it as a young guy, getting mentored by older players, and now on the other side of it. So anything that I can do to help some of the young kids, especially some of the local kids, I'll be happy to do so.
Josh Colmenter. It'll be Mother's Day on Wimbledon's centre court tonight when Serena Williams takes on fellow mum Evgenia Rodina for a place in the quarter-finals. Whoever wins, a mother will feature on the last date of the singles championships for the first time since Kim Clijsters in 2010. Only one top 10 player is left in the women's draw, and number 25 Serena Williams says it's been a very competitive this year.
Every opponent, is playing their A game. And as we see in this tournament, so many top players that have lost. And technically, I'm not a top player, but I do have the wins of one. Get ready for anyone that I play.
Serena Williams, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic are all in action in the men's draw tonight. That's the news.
A powerful image.
These kids have to wear a mask, be underwater and hold it together as they go through areas of the cave where they'll be well aware that walls are pressing in around them.
The truth behind the image.
We as communities are uncomfortable with confronting the shadows that lurk in the darkness.
And a new image.
Most of the time, the England players have been more interested in their haircut or their pop celebrity girlfriend or their new sports car than actually kicking the ball. But this time, it might be different, and we dare to dream.
Morning Report with Giles Beckford and Guy Espiner, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, investigating civilian casualties in Syria and Afghanistan, we speak to a former UN monitor. And after 10, the inside story of Apollo 8 and mankind's first journey to the moon 50 years ago. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy, with isolated squally thunderstorms and hail and northwest gales, all easing tomorrow morning and gradually clearing from the south. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, showers about the ranges, with a few spreading further east at times. Northwest gales easing early tomorrow. For Marlborough and Nelson, showers some heavy, clearing early tomorrow and becoming fine. Northwest gales about the Sounds, easing overnight. From Buller to Fiordland, showers some heavy with hail and isolated thunderstorms, clearing south of Hokitika tonight and elsewhere tomorrow and becoming fine. For Canterbury, mainly fine but showers about the high country today and brief rain everywhere overnight tonight. Otago and Southland, showers falling as snow above 600 metres until early tomorrow, then clearing in the north. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up, the government's $2.3 billion spend on some Boeing P-8 Poseidons. That's next. But first tonight, there are mounting calls for a formal police investigation into claims that a Maori leader, Te Awanui Arangi Black, was a paedophile. In a harrowing 12-minute video pasted on Facebook at the weekend, his widow, Anihira Black, outed Mr Black as the ringleader of a child sex ring and a man who'd preyed on children for years. The bombshell allegation has sent shockwaves through the Maori and Tauranga communities that knew him, with the video being viewed more than 300,000 times in just 2 days. Here's our Maori news correspondent, Lee Marama McLaughlin.
They wrote karakia or prayers alongside each other and worked together to create the Maori dictionary. Now, Te Rarawa Iwi leader Hami Piripi is mortified by claims that Tauranga leader Te Awanui Arangi Black was a paedophile. He's one of thousands who's seen the Facebook video and watched horrified as widow Anihira Black laid it all out.
If it didn't come out of his wife's mouth, I would be absolutely gobsmacked. But coming out of her mouth after 26 years of marriage, it has to be put in an irrefutable category.
Mr Piripi worked with Mr Black at the Maori Language Commission in the 2000s and says he never would have suspected. But Rosina Hauiti is an old friend of Anihira Black and says she knew a different side of her former husband.
He had a reputation for being a philanderer, and it was out in the open. I already know that he has a good reputation for the work that he has done, but there was also that other side of him.
Ms Hauiti says she did some filming at an event that captured Mr Black with a young woman in 2012 and says Mrs Black was fixated on the young woman's age.
She was really, really adamant that she wanted to see it. She had concerns around the age of the person, of this woman, and I thought nothing of it. I just thought, she just wants to see, if this is a younger, like a woman.
Mr Black held roles with Te Wānanga o Raukawa, the Tauranga Moana Iwi Leaders Group, and formed the Tūtara Kauika ki Rangatauā Kapahaka Group. Hami Piripi says the allegations will come as a huge blow to the hundreds of people Mr Black trained in Maori cultural practices, such as maurako and whaikōrero.
If you've gone through all your training on something, whether it be maurako or kapahaka or whaikōrero, whatever it may be, to find at the end of your training that the teacher wasn't tika, just totally undermines the entire thing, That's the biggest blow. It's a very personal thing.
A number of groups that Mr Black had connections to wouldn't comment to RNZ, saying they were waiting for a police investigation to be completed. The police have not confirmed that they're investigating, only that they'll be seeking further information about the allegations. But Ngaitarangi Chief Executive Paula Stanley says an investigation needs to be launched.
The iwi's reaction is fully supportive of a police investigation. They're serious allegations.
Mr Black was a regional councillor and Māori Party candidate. He died from organ failure after being in hospital for a short time in 2016. Anihira Black's last post on Facebook was one of thanks for the private messages of support, saying she shared the information for our babies. For Checkpoint, I'm Lee Marama McLaughlin.
12 minutes past 5. We turn now to this afternoon's major, although not terribly surprising, defence announcement. The government is to purchase 4 Boeing P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft from the United States at a cost of somewhere in the region of $2.3 billion. The planes are to replace 6 Orions, which have been updated but do date back to the 1960s. Why the P-8s as a replacement? Well, I spoke to Defence Minister Ron Mark shortly before we came on air.
Well, I have to start, John, by saying that I was a bit of a P-8 sceptic when I came into the government. In fact, anyone can go back and look at New Zealand First Defence Policy, and you'd probably the first thing you'd spot is that we were talking about the Seahawk in those days. But you get into government, you get a lot more information available to you. I'm not one to mark someone else's homework. I prefer to do my own work. And so we went right back to the start of the case and looked at all the arguments for and against. We looked at the various options that were available, and obviously the 3 options that met the requirement in terms of providing a large manned aircraft came down to the Boeing, the Kawasaki P-1 and the Lockheed Martin Seahawk. The problem is the Seahawk was a conceptual design. It hasn't been actually produced in this role, and the Kawasaki P-1 is still developmental.
What sort of pressure did you come on from the USA to take these planes? They use them. Australia is acquiring them from 20. Actually, they're acquiring 15, aren't they? The UK is acquiring them from 2019. Canada has an ageing fleet of Auroras that are considered to be sort of doomed about 2025, and there's pressure on them to use the P-8s. This is a Five Eyes aircraft, isn't it?
Well, you're pretty well informed, John, so I congratulate you on that. I guess it's fair to say that compatibility and interoperability are 2 fundamental principles that a sensible government would look to try and follow. But to be honest, if it was a case of looking fresh at the options, looking at what was available in terms of funding, but more importantly, looking at actual capability, what they deliver, what was also very important is the ability to support the aircraft through whole of life. And when you start looking at the number of airframes actually in the air, like the community or the family that's out there operating, that becomes very important because it tends to validate or otherwise the performance projections and the maintenance record. So when you're dealing with about 158 odd aircraft, I think it's 150 out there or due to be out there, you actually get a clear actual
maintenance history in front of you. And people can project all they like, but it's actually what turns up on the day and what you see unfolding that means anything. For aircraft that are experimental, where there's only 23 being contracted to be built, they haven't all actually been built, and they're all being bought by the same country that's making them, tends to paint a picture. And you cannot go past the fact that America has invested $9 billion in developing this capability and testing it. You also can't go past recognizing the strengths and the advantages of buying into an airframe that brings with it all future upgrades and modifications, what they term these days as the spiral upgrade option. So you're future-proofing yourself in terms of capability, and you're buying into a well-developed capability that's had a hell of a lot of money invested in it.
Absolutely. And look, all of that is true. I mean, this is a plane that has had an enormous amount of money spent on it in research and development. But you're also keeping your mates happy, aren't you? I mean, the United States wanted New Zealand to take the P-8s, didn't they?
Yeah, but I've got to say to you, John, I mean, I've met with Secretary of Defence Jim Mathis on numerous occasions. I've chatted to him informally and in formal talks. There's no pressure of New Zealand, you must buy this aircraft. I swear that has not been my experience to date. I think people recognise that New Zealand has an independence of mind. I think Ron Mark has a bit of a reputation of being an independence of mind. For me, it's about making sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of past New Zealand governments when it comes to the procurement of military capability, where we buy into something that's new in concept, that is still evolving, that is experimental, and doesn't actually have a track record against which you can judge it. I've got to say, John, I think I've probably been the strongest critic of defence procurement over the last 20 years, and I was not about to fall down that same rabbit hole myself.
Can I just say two words? Chinese submarines. How important was the capacity for this plane to track submarines and, if the proverbial is hitting the fan, actually fire anti-sub missiles at them?
Well, at the end of the day, John, you're buying a warfighting capability, and this is a capability that once it gets introduced into service in 2023, will be still flying when I'm dead. I cannot project what this country might be facing 30 years from now, 25 years from now. So it's irresponsible of me to put up an option that neutralises, denudes our military warfighting capability. So submarine hunting, anti-submarine warfare is something that New Zealand has always, a capability we've always had. We have it currently. It's interesting, we have been winners of the Finn-class trophy time and time again, demonstrating to the world that we're one of the best in that space. I guess it comes down to catering for the need, and we've done that. So it is definitely a capability we've purchased with a mind to the aircraft performing a military function. And I'm confident, but that's not all the aircraft does. In terms of environmental protection, HADAR operations, search and rescue, I think the great strength that I see in this aircraft is the speed at which it will get into a search area, the amount of water that it will be able to cover. We're talking 1,200 nautical miles with about 4-hour loiter time over target. New Zealand has a search and rescue responsibility for an 11th of the globe's surface, from the South Pole to the equator. Our search and rescue responsibility, our HADAR responsibility is massive, and so we have to buy the right capability to meet that need.
Number 5 Squadron is going to move from Whenuapai to Ohakea. Why is that? Is that about the weapons that these planes will be carrying?
It's twofold. Firstly, the ability to be able to take off with a full load of fuel is a factor. The ability to be able to weaponize the aircraft. I mean, you could always take it off from Whenuapai, partially laden with fuel, fly it down to Ohakea, weaponize it and refuel it again, then fly off on your mission. It's a terribly inefficient way of operating an aircraft. I have to go back to the previous government's considerations. They were actually considering closing Whenuapai, end of story, and moving everything to Ahakia. We're not going there. We don't subscribe to the view that you put all your aircraft in one basket. But the aircraft will perform better, will operate better if it's operating out of Ahakia. It's something that had been already planned as a move. This purchase confirms that we will make that move, but we'll still retain our tactical airlift capability out of Whenuapai and the support that goes with that. Plus, on top of that, I think we work the Sea Sprites and other things out of Whenuapai as well. And at the end of the day, you've got to have a north-based Air Force base. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have only one base. That would not be responsible.
Defence Minister Ron Mark, we spoke to him just before we came on here. We'd love your feedback on that. Text us 2101. Let's go to Thailand. Rescuers are poised to begin a second rescue mission to reach the remaining 8 boys and their football coach, trapped in a cave now for 16 days. Overnight, the 4 weakest boys, that's how they've been described, from the group of 12 were freed in a dramatic 8-hour operation. Authorities hope can be repeated overnight tonight. In a moment, we're going to speak to CNN correspondent David McKenzie, who's at the coordination centre outside the cave. But first, here's Bridget Burke with how the rescue unfolded.
ก็กราบเรียนพ่อแม่พี่น้องสื่อมวลชนทุกท่านนะครับแล้วก็
I would like to inform the public at home and those who have been giving us support that after 16 days, today's the day we have been waiting for. We are seeing the wild boars in the flesh now. Applause as the head of the Thai rescue mission, Narong Sakosotanakorn, announced 4 children had left the cave overnight New Zealand time and had been flown to Chiang Rai, where they'd been taken by ambulance to hospital. Outside, there was delight from the families of the 4 rescued boys who gathered at the home of the team's football coach to watch the news. The auntie of one of the rescued boys said she was so happy people had come to help. The auntie of trapped coach Eka Polchandawong said she was glad some children had been rescued and thanked officials for their efforts. Meanwhile, 13 foreign divers and 5 members of Thailand's elite Navy SEAL unit were late this afternoon, poised for a second mission. 2 members of that recovery team told Checkpoint they were about to enter the cave to bring the remaining 8 boys, one aged just 11, and their coach out. The mission is a dangerous one and involves a mixture of walking, wading, climbing and diving using guide ropes already in place through flooded and narrow tunnels that claimed the life of a former Thai Navy diver on Friday. The toughest part of the journey is at the halfway point at a section named T-Junction, which is so tight the divers have to take off their dive tanks to get through. Beyond that is a cavern called Chamber 3, which has been turned into a forward base for the divers. Without any more heavy rain, the boys can rest here before making the final, easier walk out to the entrance. Reuters correspondent Panu Wongcha is at the site.
We've been told that this operation could take up to 3 to 4 days, and we were told that they will gradually bring the boys out one by one with 2 divers per one of the trapped boys. What we know also is that the authorities say they are racing against time, and this is the perfect opportunity as the rain is about to arrive, and if they don't act now, they may have to reassess and the rescue operation may have to be delayed for a long time.
Authorities said the 4 rescued boys were the weakest of the group. It was unclear today as to when the boys would be reunited with their parents. There are reports this may not happen until every team member is out. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Well, CNN's David McKenzie is outside the caves in Chiang Rai. A few minutes ago I asked him when the second mission might begin or whether it already has.
Well, look, the indications is that at around this time or in the morning hours, and I apologize, there's a lot of activity where I am sitting. Around this time, John, they would move on the cave, we believe. Now, we haven't had official word yet. That might change quite soon. But the plan is this. They will try to recreate the extraordinary rescue that they managed to pull off, it seems, successfully yesterday here in the cave system in the mountain that I can see from where I'm standing. But you know, John, based on my vantage point, there's a thick, heavy cloud over that mountain. It was raining here until around 3 a.m. local time. That's a big worry because, of course, they're pumping as much water as they can out of the cave, but it can't necessarily compete with that catchment area of water going into the cave. I think that's probably the biggest worry for rescuers on deciding how exactly they move to get the next batch of boys and whether they move at all.
Do we know who's out? There's real confusion around this. Have the boys been reunited with their parents? Have they been named? Is there clarity about which 4 are now out?
Well, look, it's a particularly sensitive issue, as you can imagine, because there is some confusion as to who has come out and who hasn't. And we're not ready to share those names because, of course, the biggest priority is for the parents to get that information first. Now, there is a sense that they want to make sure that the parents whose boys may still be in the cave aren't feeling this anxiety that's as much, well, of course, they're anxious, but that it isn't compounded by confusion and media speculation. So we can't name the boys at this stage. We do know that 3 of them were able to get out of the cave, be placed in ambulances that screamed past the road where I'm sitting now. One was placed in a military chopper and taken to Chiang Rai Center, where they're all in a hospital. Initially, the plan, John, was to keep them in some kind of isolation, to both keep them safe and possibly others safe. We don't know if that plan has shifted in the last few days. What we do know is that the international team, along with the Thai Navy SEALs, were given this pause to rest up because it seems like there's only a few of them amongst the many multitudes who are helping this rescue effort who have the technical skill to actually pull this off.
Yes, this is the thing, isn't it? We talk about the Navy SEALs, but the Navy SEALs would typically be in open water, and the cave diving underwater is a very particular skill. Having said that, gosh, they went well first time around, and that must have given people a great deal of hope.
Well, you can imagine the governor arrived at the position where I'm sitting, and obviously by then word had filtered out as it does, and the local press gave him a resounding cheer, and at times they've been pretty tough on the commander and his team here. So there was a real sigh of relief, a palpable sense of, you know what, they can actually pull this off. Now, that doesn't mean that they're out of the woods, because obviously the next batch and the next batch, if the rain does fall down, could be even harder and more challenging. So once done doesn't mean they can do it again, but it will give them a real sense of hope that their bold and brave decision to go in there was in fact the right one at this stage.
Dave McKenzie, who was CNN's man on the spot, talking to us shortly before we came on air. 5:27. British police have launched a full-blown murder inquiry after a woman who was exposed to the nerve agent Novichok died in hospital. 44-year-old Dawn Sturgis and her partner suddenly became violently ill last week after visiting Salisbury. It's still not clear how the pair came into contact with the poison, which was used in an attack in Salisbury 4 months ago on the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The BBC's Tom Burridge has this report.
Killed after somehow coming into contact with a deadly nerve agent. Dawn Sturgis's death means the police are now investigating murder.
The staff here at Salisbury District Hospital worked tirelessly to save Dawn. Our staff are talented, dedicated and professional, and I know that they will be hurting too. They did everything that they could.
Chemical weapons experts have been decontaminating the hostel where Dawn Sturgis lived. Police say she was killed by the same type of nerve agent, known as a Novichok, used against a former Russian spy and his daughter back in March. The government blamed Russia for the poisoning of the Skripals, who survived. The Home Secretary in Salisbury this weekend has called on Moscow to provide answers. The Kremlin says it wasn't involved, but with a British citizen now dead, the ramifications of a nerve agent attack in Salisbury are even more serious. Meanwhile, Dawn Sturgis's partner, Charlie Rowley, is still in a critical condition in hospital. Police are investigating whether they touched a container used in the original nerve agent attack.
Great. OK, great. That was the end of the report, and I was just agreeing with what we're going to do next. The story wasn't great, but our decision about what we're going to do between now and 5:30 was met with my full agreement. Tom Burridge from the BBC. The British Prime Minister Theresa May said she's appalled and shocked by Ms Sturgis's death. Now, as discussed, we're going to play the sting. That was great. And now we're going to have some feedback. We're getting lots of it. Boy, oh boy, you are overwhelmingly pleased about the P8. It's 100% so far. Good news about the P8s. It's good to finally get an updated maritime capability. I do wonder, though, that bearing in mind this country's huge maritime area of responsibility, is 4 P8s actually enough? That could possibly be from someone who works at Boeing. We don't know, but they clearly like the P8. Good to hear Ron Marks talk practical sense about Air Force capability rather than a lefty PC version of defence requirements, says Ian. Enjoying listening to Ron Mark, a minister who's clearly on top of his portfolio, says Helen from Christchurch. Goodness gracious me, his cup runneth over on the feedback front this evening. Coming up next on Checkpoint, thousands of public servants walk off the job for 2 hours. Later in the programme, we're going to talk about the Football World Cup, which has got to semi-final stage. And we're also going to Japan. Flooding has killed dozens of people and seen more than 2 million people evacuated. More than 2 million, all of that coming up. But now, a bastion of professionalism, which is desperately needed just at the moment. Here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The government has confirmed it's spending more than $2 billion to replace the Air Force's ageing Orions with 4 Boeing Poseidons from the US. The Defence Minister, Ron Mark, told Checkpoint the ability to work alongside Australia and the US is important, and the deal will future-proof the Air Force with guaranteed upgrades. Calls are mounting for the police to fully investigate claims that a Tauranga Maori leader who died 2 years ago was a pedophile. The allegations have been made by Te Awanuiarangi Black's widow, Anahira Black, in a Facebook video. Tauranga iwi, including Ngāti Pūkenga and Ngai Tarangi, are calling for a formal investigation, and they're encouraging people to come forward if they have any information. 8 Thai boys and their football coach are still trapped inside Tham Luang Cave. There's still no official word on when the painstaking operation to guide them out will resume. An Auckland rest home, Somerset by the Park, has been reprimanded for making an elderly woman wait 19 days for a wound dressing to be changed. When her family took her to a GP, the wound was found to be infected and smelly with a yellow discharge, a wet dressing and a surrounding bacterial skin infection. The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, is back in charge of the Civil Aviation Authority after being fined $500 for talking on his phone on a plane. He used the phone after the doors had closed on a plane preparing to depart from Wellington in May. Mr Twyford says he apologises unreservedly and will pay the fine shortly. Motorists are being asked to carry chains as a blanket of snow and ice covers the Lindis Pass from Cromwell to Omarama. A large slip has closed State Highway 6 near Murchison, and a further 2 slips, one in the Buller Gorge and the other on the main road between Westport and Greymouth, has reduced roads to 1 lane. State Highway 63 at Renwick, or I have been told maybe Renwick, near Nelson, and State Highway 94 Te Anau to Milford Sound have now reopened. And apologies to people in Renwick or Renwick if I have mispronounced.
Well, you've said both.
I've said both, so I'm covering all bases.
Yeah, excellent, Katrina Batten. I hope we don't have to do all in cover all bases.
I hope not. Somebody will let us know. Please email or send us a text to tell me what is the preferred pronunciation of Renwick / Renwick.
Oh, it's Cheviot, and Cheviot gets me. The locals say Cheviot.
Yeah.
So I just say Cheviot.
Yeah, well, you just have to go with what the locals say. St Arnaud.
Except for all the locals say Whenuapai, it's Whenuapai.
As we all know.
Hard out.
Yeah, man.
Right, thanks very much, Katrina Batten. Let's turn to business news now with Matt Chatterton. And Spark's in trouble with the Commerce Commission, Matt. What's happening there?
Yeah, the telco company is facing court action for allegedly, favourite word that one, overcharging thousands of customers. The Commerce Commission filed 11 charges under the Fair Trading Act in the Auckland District Court this morning. The charges relate to 3 separate issues, including overcharging for broadband data, a misleading voucher for new customers, and continuing to charge customers after they left the provider. Spark has already refunded more than $1 million to those affected customers. And they also donated $260,000 to charities so that they wouldn't profit from those problems. As Chief Executive Simon Muta told us earlier that he acknowledges the errors but says they weren't intentional. He also says the money the company and the Commission will spend on lawyers would have been better donated to charity, of course. And he did offer the Commission a settlement payment, but they did not accept it.
It's fascinating, that case, isn't it? There are new calls for property managers to be regulated. This is getting a bit of momentum, this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. I spoke to a couple of people within the industry recently. So this all came about because the Property Institute and Independent Property Managers Association, they've merged in a way, I guess, of holding off government plans to regulate the sector, which, as we know at the moment, has no real regulation. The two organisations have signed a memorandum of understanding to, as they say, lift the industry standards and snuff out what have been called the renegade property managers that have been tarnishing the industry at the moment. I'm sure you've seen the stories about managers offering properties that blatantly aren't up to standards. I mean, we had a report out of maggots, mould, and some properties with no curtains as well, which is all terrible to hear about. And it's not just independent property managers that are getting caught out by this either. It's also companies, which is also concerning. The Housing Minister Phil Twyford had hinted at introducing some stiffer rules to weed out those property managers that have been hitting the headlines. However, the Property Institute's Chief Executive Ashley Church, he told me the merger has pleased Mr Twyford somewhat, and that Mr Twyford has assured him he won't make any changes, looks like, until the next term of government. Obviously the industry is trying to remain self-regulated. That's really what it wants at the end of the day, out of the control of the government. It's setting up an anonymous complaints process for tenants to come in if they have any problems. This is sort of the way of sort of appeasing the government, and it's also saying there'll be stricter testing for property managers that are members of these two organisations. However, I also spoke to the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand, the CEO, Bindi Norwell. She says the only way to stop these property managers that are causing so much trouble is to regulate. She says the moves that these two organisations are good, but self-regulation isn't the answer, and Mr Twyford needs to come down harder on these property managers.
We might try to talk to the Minister about that. Thanks, Matt. Hey, what happened on the markets today?
Well, actually the NZX has fallen today, which is interesting given last week it was hitting so many highs. It's down 22 points to 9,062. The US dollar is down a little bit. It's sitting at around 68.4 US cents. The Australian's also down at 91.7, but the Great British Pound is up ever so slightly at 51.4.
Matt Chatterton doing business for us from Wellington. Thanks very much indeed, Matty. We have never experienced this kind of rain before. That was how a Japanese weather official described the deadly floods that have hit western parts of the country. Nearly 90 people have been killed and more than 2 million evacuated as unprecedented rainfall set off landslides and flash flooding. The Hiroshima prefecture has been the hardest hit. Up to 50,000 military and emergency personnel have been deployed. CNN's Linda Kincaid has the latest.
Entire regions devastated by record rainfall in southwestern Japan. As the number of missing persons rises, so does the death toll. The storm is being called a disaster of historic proportions, but the worst is yet to come. Gushing waters and landslides leave homes damaged or destroyed, with tens of thousands of people having already fled for safety. The government says nearly 2 million people in the south and east have been forced to evacuate. And with more severe weather on the way, millions more may also have to head for higher ground. Footage shows military personnel airlifting patients from hospitals and using boats to transport residents and elderly people to safety. Some have had to wait on their rooftops to be rescued. For this man, his nightmare is just beginning.
I went to my father's family home, but it was hopeless. We were hoping to find 2 people, but still can't find one.
After 3 days of torrential downpours, some cities have received more water in 24 hours than they would in an entire month. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe ordered an emergency meeting in which he addressed the mobilization of search and rescue efforts.
Even now, we have not been able to confirm the safety of quite a lot of people, and there are many who are stranded, facing the terror of impending inundation and waiting for rescue. The rescue and life-saving operation is now a race against the clock.
8 regions from central to southern Japan have been impacted, from rivers gushing through Kyoto to train services stopping in Hiroshima.
Linda Kincaid reporting. Linda's with CNN, of course. About 4,000 staff from Inland Revenue and the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment (MB) took to the streets around the country today to protest for fairer pay increases. Rallies were held in 9 cities, while in some areas staff chose to ditch their office desk to volunteer instead. Katie Doyle reports.
Thousands of staff from MB and IRD walked off the job today in protest of their latest pay offer, which they say simply isn't enough in the face of rising living costs. In Auckland, around 100 staff converged on the busy intersection at Queen and Victoria Streets, waving placards and calling for better pay. An IRD staff member, Troy, says 1 in 4 Public Service Association members there are earning $48,000 or less.
It's fair enough if that's a starting salary, but it's not. Some of them have actually been with the department for a very long time, and they're still getting very low income. So it's really just wanting to make sure that their salary goes up in order to meet the rising costs of everyday living.
The Assistant Secretary at the PSA, Basil Prestige, says they hope to send a message that IRD and MB workers expect fair treatment.
So MB, there's talks again on Wednesday, so we're hopeful that things can progress, but we'll wait and see. IRD, we haven't got any other talks arranged at this point.
He says around 300 staff across both agencies aren't even earning the living wage of $20.55. In Nelson, PSA members opted to turn their strike action into community work, planting trees and shrubs at Tahuanui Beach. Local organiser Josh Gardner says wet weather meant a planned beach clean-up was abandoned.
And we've changed our plans today to come in and do some tree planting or shrub planting in the local area down at Tahuna Beach, so it's still in the same vicinity.
Richard Wilson, a compliance officer with Immigration New Zealand in Nelson, was among those who turned out in the rain. He says while the focus is on the strike action and getting a good outcome, they also want to do something that gives back to the community.
Very rarely do we get opportunities as public servants to give back to the community, and we just thought this might be a good way of showing the public that yes, we are out on strike, but we actually want to do something constructive as well.
Mr Wilson has been with the department for 14 years and says it's not the first time they've taken industrial action. In fact, none of the department's collective employment agreements have been settled through normal negotiation. Each has been the subject of industrial action.
Which is a real shame, because I work for an employer that, I think is in general tries to be a good employer. But I think when it comes to employment relations, we could possibly see some improvements there.
In Wellington, Rachel Felgate, who is part of MB's research and evaluation team, says the agency expects staff to do extra work, but isn't willing to pay for it. She says MB has failed to listen to its employees' concerns.
We have put to MB what we think is a fair deal to keep our pay up, and MB have turned around and basically said no, so we're trying to encourage them to change their minds on that. Basically, they're asking us to start working for free.
Benjamin from the IRD says he joined the Wellington strike because it's ridiculous that some staff aren't paid a living wage, despite being government employees.
We just want a fair pay increase, So far IR has just said no to everything, and I don't think that the PSA's requests are unreasonable. They're actually very reasonable based on the standard for the rest of the country.
No one would reveal what the current offer includes, but the union described the pay increases it is requesting as modest. A second 2-hour-long strike is set for the 23rd of July. For Checkpoint in Wellington, ko Katie Doyle, Tēnei.
Renwick or Renwick, we were discussing it during the headlines with Katrina, and we have lots of feedback coming in. Renwick was named for Dr. Thomas Renwick. It's spelt with a W but pronounced with 2 N's, who came to New Zealand from Scotland in the 1840s, who lived in Nelson but owned land in Marlborough. The town was originally called Renwick Town. It's pronounced Renwick by newer locals, however. Many who've been around for a long time still use the correct pronunciation, which is for the doctor for whom the town was named. So, originally it was called Renwick, even though it was spelt with a W, after the doctor of the same name and the same spelling and the same pronunciation. I think it's an either-either, isn't it? A security guard put in place, but thank you for letting us know. A security guard put in place a month ago at the acute inpatient unit at Christchurch's main mental health facility has been described as useless by nurses who work there. It was revealed earlier this year that there were up to 30 assaults on nurses a month in the unit at Hill Morton Hospital, with staff accusing management of not taking their safety seriously. The Canterbury District Health Board responded by agreeing to put in a security guard, but said they would not be able to restrain patients. So what are they able to do? And is it working? I spoke to our reporter Logan Church outside Hillmorton Hospital a short time ago.
Well, in May that we reported that this facility, which I'm standing just on the road in front of, saw up to 30 assaults on nursing staff a month. That is the adult acute inpatient unit at Hillmorton Hospital. At the time, nurses we spoke to said security guards were the answer, and they needed to be placed throughout the hospital as quickly as possible. Essentially, we had a situation where mostly young, mostly female nurses were having to deal with, sadly, mostly male patients. At the time, the Canterbury District Health Board weren't necessarily sold on the idea of security guards. They were in fact looking at an alternative support staff option, a sort of support worker for the nurses. However, on the 29th of May, the CDHB did seem to change its tune a little bit, saying in an email to staff that there was now a temporary need for a security guard to be placed in the adult acute inpatient unit.
Has that guard proven at all useful in solving the assault problem? Are they efficacious, Logan?
Well, in May, nurses were sceptical about the guard's effectiveness even before the guard was put in place. And there was two main reasons for that. One of the reasons was that the guard was to be placed in an area known as the low stimulus area. And that's not where the nurses I spoke to said the guard was needed. They said the guard was needed in the high care areas and the open wards themselves. The second reason was in that 29th of May email, the CDHB management explicitly said that that guard could not be used to restrain any patients at all, so they essentially that they couldn't touch anyone until after someone was assaulted. Now, I've been speaking to nurses since. I've been speaking to nurses today, and they say essentially that what they suspected was to be the case has turned out to be the reality. One nurse said that security guard role has turned out to be completely useless in their words. They say all the guard can do when the proverbial hits the fan, so to speak, is to stand there and look intimidating and scary. They say that the guard won't, or at least can't, intervene until after someone has been hit, or in other words, when after the damage has been done. Another nurse said that this guard just seemed to be another knee-jerk reaction from the Canterbury District Health Board after the media reports on the serious staff assaults, and again, they are calling for security guards to be placed throughout the facility 24/7.
Gosh, it's interesting if they can't do anything. It's a strange old role, isn't it? Is anyone saying this guard has been helpful?
Well, the CDHB and the nurses organisation, that's the nurses union, have told me in the past that there are mixed views on having security guards on site. Now, I've spoken to nurses across the spectrum of age and experience, and no one that I've spoken to have actually spoken in favour of this particular role. They've all said that this particular security guard role is pretty useless. I mean, there very well might be nurses that say that this guard has been helpful, but I certainly haven't been able to find them. But as usual, I asked the Canterbury District Health Board about this, but again, as usual, they declined to be interviewed, and I'm still waiting for a response.
Logan Church, we've just received a response actually from the Canterbury DHB. Its Mental Health Services General Manager Tony Guslag says in a statement the DHB realises that security guards are limited by the scope of their role. However, she says as a safety measure and in response to requests for an increased security presence from staff, the CDHB believes having a guard on site is a practical thing it can do as a backup for the nurses. She says 2 action groups have been formed to tackle safety issues, and they are expected to make recommendations in the next 6 months. We would love to hear from you if you work at Hillmorton. Text us 2101 and we are happy to deal with you off the record. It's coming up to 11 minutes to 6. The campaign against Teagle's plan for the country's largest chicken farm south of Dargaville has ramped up. A big roadside billboard with signs facing each way has appeared on land beside the site, and more are on the way. Our Northland reporter Lois Williams filed this report.
As protest signs go, they're works of art. Teagle-free zone, they shout, and say no to Teagle's mega factory, all in big colourful lettering on a striking background of the local landscape. The signs are the work of the well-known painter David Sarich, who returned to the north to live in 2016.
I never thought I'd go to the Kaipara and start painting protest signs. First off, the idea was to go home and, paint the river. Well, obviously, this is part of the river series.
But then David Sarich never thought he'd be coming home to live over the river from New Zealand's biggest chicken farm. Tegel wants to build 32 poultry sheds, nearly as long as rugby fields, stocked with more than 1 million chooks at a time, on low-lying farmland at Arapohoi, near the northern Wairoa River. That's 9 million birds a year, and their waste and their smell. David Sarich says, leaving that aside, the location of the farm near two iconic maunga, Mangaraho and Tokatoka, would blight a well-loved local landscape.
So we really have to think seriously about this. I mean, where they propose to position this factory is actually in between those maunga, and it's so wrong on all sorts of levels.
Tegel says it needs to scale up to meet the demand for free-range, sustainably farmed chicken, and it believes it can mitigate the waste and the smell using new technology to incinerate the litter and heat the sheds. But the locals are sceptical. John Walker, whose property overlooks the Tegel site, says an independent report has cast doubt on the claim that it can reduce the smell.
Council have undertaken a report by another smell specialist called Becker, and they say there's no proof that this 51% will work, and then they list if it is only 41%, then this many more houses will be affected. If it's 70%, then this many more houses will be affected, including the local schools.
John Walker says the Tegel project has divided the local community and even some families. He says Tegel bought out some homeowners early on because their properties were within the supposed smell zone of 1 million chooks.
Those people are now on one side, and they may not have even fully understood the scope of the project when that went ahead, when they weren't given all of the information, we don't think.
But only a handful of people are openly supporting the Tegel proposal, while more than 500 have submitted against it. Nearby Kapeha Marae is strongly opposed. Its urupa adjoins the Tegel property. The chair, Dr Margaret Mutu, is incensed that Tegel refused to pay university rates for a cultural impact assessment, which she would have done as Māori Studies professor. Instead, she says, it hired an East Coast Māori consultant. And in his report out today, she says he's reached an astonishing conclusion about the effects of the mega chook farm on tangata whenua.
The so-called cultural expert who has no training in Māori studies that I can see, it makes the most outrageous statement that neither our urupa nor our marae is tapu. And I don't think anyone who knows the first thing about the Māori world would accept that an urupa or a marae is not tapu.
The Kaipara Community Association is now fundraising to pay for lawyers to represent the opposition to the Tegel project at resource consent hearings. Independent commissioners acting for the Kaipara District and Northland Regional Councils will hear the case for and against the chicken farm in Dargaville next month. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Let's turn now to the Football World Cup. So far this century it's been won by 4 different nations. In 2014 it was Germany, 2010 Spain, 2006 Italy, 2002 Brazil, and 2018 none of those teams are in the semi-finals. Which speaks of 2 things, I guess. 1, that the battle for football supremacy really is a global one, and 2, that this World Cup has seen some surprises. Russia making the final 8, probably the big one. Germany making the first flight out, another big surprise. England and Croatia making the final 4, surprising, maybe not huge. That's semi-final 2 this week, but semi-final 1 does involve 2 teams that featured as player prospects in most pre-tournament discussions, France and Belgium. And Clay Wilson, what a game that will be.
These are 2 teams stacked with talent. We've seen this throughout the tournament from both these teams. The level of player they've got in this team is just pretty much unmatched outside of a Brazil or someone like that. So, yeah, I guess France showed what they could do against Uruguay. Uruguay were a team who conceded 1 goal the whole tournament. France scored 2 against them in 90 minutes. So I guess they've eased their way through. In Belgium, well, they've put out Brazil. So I guess their credentials are pretty much out there in the open. A brilliant first half, a screaming goal to go 2-0 up. And then defended with a lot of grit. So they showed they can play on both sides of the ball. So I guess we'll see what happens. France will probably be fresher, I imagine. Only played 90 minutes. Belgium were really put to the sword against Brazil. A lot of defensive work and running. But it's a game that just screams, a lot of entertainment, potentially 4 or 5 goals.
Clay, a whole lot of people who don't normally watch football start watching it about now. So who are the players we should be looking out for in the semi-final France-Belgium? Who are the stars?
Well, I guess we'll start with France. A couple of youngish players. Antoine Griezmann, he's really the talk of world football at the moment. A player who's immense ability and really is one of probably the top 5 players in the world at the moment. And then a young striker by the name of Kylian Mbappe. He played an absolutely brilliant game against Argentina. You'll remember that 4-3 game. Scored 2 goals, set up 1. He's got pace to burn. I'm not sure what he runs the 100 metres in. It would have to be.
He's just beautiful to watch, isn't he? He's 19 years old. I mean, he wouldn't even get into a bar without ID, this kid. And he's going to be one of the key players in the semi-final of the Football World Cup.
He's one of those players that, you watch in any sport where they just glide across the turf and it seems to be effortless. It's like that. And 19 years old, and he doesn't seem to show any signs of nerves on what is the biggest stage in world sport outside the Olympics, really.
OK, so that's France. What about Belgium?
Belgium, also a lot of attacking talent. They've got their main striker up front, Romelu Lukaku, of course, plays for Manchester United. Is a guy, big, powerful guy, still quite young, but also can score, set up goals. Has been brilliant in the last couple of games for Belgium, really crucial. And then a guy in the midfield, Kevin De Bruyne, plays for Manchester City. He's just one of those industrious, hard-working guys. But as he showed in the last game, you give him space outside the box and he can shoot and score. It was an absolutely brilliantly taken goal.
He's cool-headed, isn't he? Yeah. Boy, he just looks completely unfazed by everything.
Just the whole package. These are players that can come back, work defensively, can create things in the midfield, and then you give them a chance up front, and they can score and create goals as well. So, yeah, it's just a lot of talent, and I expect it'll be a brilliant 90 minutes or plus, whatever it goes to.
Yeah, I'm tried rugby, as everyone knows, and I can't wait for this game. I'm looking forward to it so much. Let's talk about England-Croatia. 2 teams that not many people would have expected to make the semi-finals, I think, before the tournament began.
Yeah, I think if you'd have asked Croatian fans and definitely England fans, would you take a semi-final at the start of the tournament? They would have taken. In fact, I spoke to a couple of English fans yesterday, and one of them admitted he'd betted on them coming out at the round of 16. So there you go. It shows how much faith they had, because this English team really, though they've got this far, they weren't really that. No. Didn't have that much hype behind them coming in. The expectation level wasn't high, and perhaps that's what's helped them a little bit. Of course, England teams always have a lot of expectation, but there wasn't really an expectation that they would maybe get this far. So they've been able to use that and to reach this stage. So we will see. I guess, yeah, they've sort of got nothing to lose from this point.
No, I agree. It's such a victory being there. And you're right. I think that everyone who loves football will know what I'm talking about. The pressure that England normally approach Football World Cups from their home supporters, from their own supporters, is just absurd. And it has felt lighter this time, and I do think they've been liberated by it.
Yeah, and I think also the new manager, Gareth Southgate, a young guy who's played for the team in the past, he's been a big part of this. They've been a lot more open with the media. They seem to, the British public has embraced them a bit more. It's quite often been an adversarial type relationship between the media, the public and the football team. But that seems to have really moulded into one, and everyone's on the same page. And I actually think England fans genuinely believe now. I was a bit sceptical last week as to some of them, if they really believe they could go all the way, but they're really 180 minutes away from, breaking a hoodoo that stretches back to 1966.
It's incredible, isn't
it?
Yeah. Trivia question, what is the population of Croatia?
Just over 4 million, less than New Zealand.
Yeah, it's extraordinary they're in the semi-finals, isn't it? It's a great story.
Well, it's amazing when you think about it. If you look at it on that basis, it's like us succeeding in rugby. The population-wise, it doesn't make sense. But in football, it's even more pronounced because football really is a global game. For Croatia to be succeeding just shows, I'm not sure what they've got in the water there or what. I guess there's no real perfect answer to it, but it is remarkable they've got to where they are.
Right, Clay. Okay, let's pick our winners. France, Belgium.
Well, I've sort of been on France a lot of the way through the tournament outside of Brazil, so I'm going to stay with France. I think they'll be a bit fresher and probably just a little bit more well-rounded across the field. Belgium have some real ability, but they really got put to the ringer against Brazil in that second half, and I think that will probably come back to ultimately bring their downfall against France.
And England, Croatia?
Yeah, I'm going to say Croatia. Croatia haven't really peaked. I think they haven't had their best game at the tournament, and I probably think they're due for that. England will be fresher like France will, because England only played 90 minutes. But yeah, I don't know if England perhaps at the moment quite have the experience in what is a really big game. They've got through a couple of big games so far, but you've got to get through 4 or 5 really big games to win a World Cup. And I feel like Croatia have a bit more experience, they're a bit more battle-hardened and probably will just edge them. But, I mean, both these games are really 50-50. It's very hard to pick at this point.
Oh, yes, it is. Clay Wilson, extraordinary. Katrina Batten, you asked, is it Renwick or Renwick? Well, it's both, but it was originally Renwick. It's just everyone says Renwick now. Colette has emailed in Bessick, which is spelt Beswick, but is meant to be said Beswick. No, it's meant to be said Bessick. Sorry, Colette. Oh, damn it. And Marshbank Street in Mount Vic, when I was growing up, spelled Marjorie Banks, said Marsh. Who knew?
English language, very strange. RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten, aho. The Defence Minister says being able to work closely with the likes of Australia and the United States was part of the decision to buy 4 maritime patrol aircraft from the US, but the deal stands on its own merits. The government will spend $2.3 billion on the P-8A Poseidons, the biggest Defence Force purchase since the Anzac frigates 30 years ago. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
From 2023 on, the Poseidons will replace the fleet of Orions in service since the 1960s. The Defence Minister Ron Mark says this will ensure New Zealand can keep doing maritime surveillance and humanitarian and disaster response. The Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters also today confirmed China has expressed concerns to New Zealand's ambassador in Beijing about the recent defence policy statement. That document refers to the growing influence of China in the South China Sea and the Pacific. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says he would have let 2 far-right activists speak in New Zealand. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff has banned Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux from speaking at any council venue. The controversial Canadian speakers have since cancelled their trip to New Zealand. Mr Peters said today the government would have allowed them to come.
Despite the fact that what they might have to say is the very antithesis of what nearly all of us believe here, we still believe in their freedom and their right for them to express it in free speech.
The Acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters. About 4,000 staff from Inland Revenue and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment walked off the job this afternoon. They say they're overworked and underpaid, and it's time for their employers to come to the negotiating table. Rallies were held in 9 cities throughout the country, while in some areas staff chose to give their time to community work. An IRD employee, Troy, says 1 in 4 Public Service Association members there are earning $48,000 or less.
It's fair enough if that's starting salary, but it's not. Some of them have actually been with the department for a very long time and they're still getting very low income. So it's really just wanting to make sure that their salary goes up in order to meet the rising costs of everyday living.
An IRD employee, Troy. 2 Auckland Domino's franchises have been fined $32,000 for failing more than 100 staff. The businesses based in Henderson and Te Atatu both failed to provide staff with correct employment agreements or to keep wage, time, holiday and leave records. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says 112 staff were affected. The companies and their owner, Ji Chen, have been fined and Mr Chen has paid his staff $54,000 in arrears. The lead retail labour inspector, Lua Ward, says it's disappointing to see companies that operate under established international brands failing to provide minimum rights. She says it's unacceptable businesses with highly systematic approaches to their product don't have a similar approach to employment rights. The British government has been thrown into turmoil after the resignation of the minister responsible for negotiating Britain's exit from the European Union. David Davis has resigned from Cabinet, saying Theresa May's newly endorsed Brexit plan will leave Britain in a weak negotiating position. The BBC's Laura Koonsberg has more from Westminster.
Mr Davis had been frustrated for some time after the most senior official at his department was moved to work directly for Theresa May. And then the Prime Minister chose to opt for closer ties to the EU than he was arguing for. Downing Street may believe his departure might not make that much difference beyond a couple of days of Westminster dramatics. But the atmosphere in the Tory party is febrile. And with this departure, the anger felt by Brexiteers has a powerful new voice to express it.
Laura Koonsberg reporting. The wait continues outside the Tham Luang cave in northern Thailand for news that the second phase of the rescue operation to free 8 boys and their coach has resumed. Overnight, 4 boys were successfully rescued by a team of expert divers. The BBC's Sophie Long is near the cave entrance.
We think by our count that there are now 6 ambulances at the cave mouth ready to take any boys that emerged today to hospital in Chiang Rai. I should say we don't have any official confirmation that the actual diving evacuation operation has resumed, but we do hope that we will see some more boys being taken past us to the hospital in Chiang Rai, where their 4 teammates were taken yesterday.
Sophie Long. Some reports suggest heavy rain in the mountains where the cave is may be delaying the rescue attempt. Disability campaigners say it's unacceptable a disabled student has been forced to start fundraising to pay for the extra help she needs to finish her degree. 23-year-old Boshe McGregor, who has cerebral palsy, is halfway through her support worker degree, but the grant covering additional academic support has run out and she's set up a Give a Little page. The Cerebral Palsy Society's chief executive, Julie Sinclair, says Ms McGregor's experience is not uncommon.
Over half our staff have cerebral palsy and most of them have degrees, but when I talk to them about some of the barriers, they all agree that there are a lot of barriers that they have to access or move through in order to have a level playing field with other people.
Julie Sinclair says the Society is now working with Ms McGregor's family to help fund her education. A man who was assaulted at a South Dunedin service station on Saturday night remains in a serious but stable condition. The 43-year-old was taken to hospital with serious injuries after the assault on the forecourt of Mobile Forbury in Hillside Road. The police say they're working to identify and speak with anyone who was there at the time. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of Jeremiah Tower and his contemporary American cuisine. Dana Johansson discusses contemporary New Zealand sport, and Daniel Eriksson talks about his photography, capturing everything from women living off-grid on Stewart Island to ships being broken up for scrap in Pakistan.
You opened for John Toogood in the D4.
Yeah, I saw 5 minutes John Toogood before they threw me out of the pub because of the stupid 10 o'clock rule.
What? Why? How old are you?
14. Roman's just turned 13. He was 12 at the time of the gig.
The Young and the Restless on Lately with Karen Hay, weeknights at 10 p.m. on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Showers, some heavy with isolated squally thunderstorms and hail and northwest gales, all easing tomorrow morning and gradually clearing from the south. Gisborne to Wairarapa, showers about the ranges with a few spreading further east at times, northwest gales easing early tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson, showers, some heavy, clearing early tomorrow and becoming fine. Northwest gales about the Sounds easing overnight. Bulletu Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail and isolated thunderstorms, clearing south of Hokitika this evening and elsewhere tomorrow and becoming fine. Canterbury, mainly fine but showers about the high country today and brief rain everywhere overnight tonight. Otago and Southland, showers falling as snow above 600 metres until early tomorrow, then clearing in the north and the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. We're going to return to the 2 stories we began the program with. Coming up in a moment, Jane Patterson on the government's purchase of the Poseidon P-8, the Boeing planes for maritime surveillance work, $2.3 billion announced this afternoon by Ron Mark, who was with us on the program earlier. Jane Patterson's take on it next. But first, cave divers in Thailand are poised to restart the high-risk operation to extract the remaining 8 boys and their football coach from a vast flooded cave system. Overnight, 4 of the boys were safely brought out after a dangerous, risky operation in which they were led through the dark, rocky cave, sometimes squeezing through spaces only 30 centimetres high by 2 divers. In several stretches they had to don scuba gear to dive several hundred metres, all of that from young boys who can't swim, let alone dive. The 4 are now in hospital where they're with their families. After the boys emerged, authorities then suspended the operation for 10 hours. The governor of Chiang Rai province, who's also the head of the rescue mission, said phase 2 would begin when everybody is ready.
นะครับแต่อยู่ระหว่างประมาณ
We'll have to assess the conditions and make sure everything is stable, just like today. If it is stable and we're confident, we will proceed with the operation.
It's not yet certain whether the second phase of the operation has resumed. We are being told it has by people that we've been talking to up there, including one of the French dive team who was going back in when our producer Bridget Burt called him a couple of hours ago. The BBC's Sophie Long has been covering the stories that unfolded over the past 2 weeks and says it does look like the rescue operation is about to restart.
Well, I'm just outside the road that leads up to the cave entrance, and we've seen a lot of activity here this morning, a number of ambulances going in, some coming out. We think by our count that there are now 6 ambulances at the cave mouth ready to take any boys that emerged today to hospital in Chiang Rai. I should say we don't have any official confirmation that the actual diving evacuation operation has resumed. We were told at a press conference at 9 p.m. last night that that part of the operation was being suspended, largely so the 13 expert international divers leading that operation could rest, and of course so that air tanks and things like that could be refueled. So it does look like there's a lot of activity going on here at the moment, and certainly yesterday we were given a lot of caution by the authorities here that it will take many hours. We were told it would take at least 11 hours to get each of the boys out. They came out much more quickly than that, the first boy emerging after just 8 hours. They will of course be buoyed by the fact that this operation went very well yesterday, better I should say than many people had feared. But these are changing circumstances, and also, not least, you need to take into account the fact that each of the boys, many of whom couldn't swim, none of whom have got any diving experience, they may react very differently to the journey ahead of them today. So, as we did yesterday, we stand here, we watch and we wait. There is a lot of nervous anticipation, as there was yesterday, and as you can imagine, a huge amount of rumours flying around. So local Thai media always reporting much more quickly than other people can get confirmed the number of boys coming out of the cave. But we do hope that we will see some more boys being taken, where I'm standing here, past us, to the hospital in Chiang Rai, where their 4 teammates were taken yesterday.
That's the BBC's Sophie Long. 18 divers are involved in the rescue operation. These are interesting figures. 13 are foreign divers, 5 are Thai Navy SEALs. The reason for that is not that the Thai Navy SEALs aren't outstanding, but that actually diving in caves, particularly caves like these, requires a very particular skill, and it's not work that the Thai Navy or any Navy typically does. Doctors at the hospital where the 4 rescue boys were taken have said their condition is not bad, but they're watching for any emerging conditions or sicknesses. Obviously, we will update you if we are able to confirm that the second rescue attempt has begun. It's the largest defence purchase since the Anzac frigates. The government has signed off on more than $2 billion to buy 4 Poseidon maritime patrol craft from the United States. The Boeing P-8s will replace the Orion fleet, due to come to the end of their operational life in 2025. Wonderful service, 5 decades they've been in the Air Force. Political editor Jane Patterson reports.
The Defence Minister Ron Mark says he used to be sceptical about the Poseidons, but is now convinced they're the best option.
The government has not made this decision lightly. We took the business case back to first principles and questioned and analysed all of the options thoroughly ourselves. We did not rubber stamp the former government's homework. Maintaining maritime patrol capability is essential for New Zealand's national security and for our ability to contribute to global security efforts.
Mr Mark says this will ensure the Defence Force will be able to keep delivering on maritime surveillance, resource protection, humanitarian and disaster response in New Zealand and the region. And he says being able to work closely with the likes of Australia and the United States is important.
Capability interoperability is highlighted as one of those advantages that we should always seek to have, but I've got to say that in going back, I was a P-8 sceptic, put my hand up on that one, but no matter how I looked at this case, the aircraft stacks up on its own, and at the end of the day, it is the only option that delivers all of the capabilities.
The total package will cost $2.3 billion, which includes the aircraft, training systems and supporting infrastructure. Mr Mark was asked if the Poseidons were the most expensive option put before Cabinet.
Commercial confidentiality debars me from actually disclosing the costs of all of the options, of any of the options, but can I say that this is the best option, and in terms of the cost effectiveness of it is the best deal. Let me just put it to you that way, and I wouldn't be assuming that it was the dearest option on an aircraft by aircraft basis. That's all I'll say to you.
Ron Mark says this will mean the Air Force No. 5 squadron will be moved from Whenuapai to Ohakea, and the runway at Whenuapai is one reason.
There's two things about the runway. One is that it is too short for the aircraft to take off fully laden and fully fuelled. This is not new, actually. The previous government, it's interesting going back through the documents to see that the previous government was intending moving this capability anyway down to Ohakea. In fact, they were looking at closing Whenuapai. It had something to do with the Prime Minister's electorate, and the decision shifted. But this is actually a continuation of those original plans. The other thing is that, you know, these are combat aircraft. They can't be weaponised in Whenuapai because of the level of encroachment now that exists with housing being built right in on the borders. So it makes a lot of sense to have the aircraft relocated, and that's something that the previous government had concluded as well.
The Chief of Defence Force Air Vice Marshal Kevin Short says there will be a lot to do to prepare for the Poseidons. We're going to have to build hangars and working accommodation. We're going to have to look at the strengthening taxiways and support areas. We have to build a simulator house, so the whole infrastructure for that. We were going to have to do that in Whenuapai regardless, but looking at the length of the runway and the support that we can provide at Ohakea, it's the right place to move them. He says the recommendation to move was made by a project team. I mean, it's something I absolutely believe is the right decision, but we have a project team that presents all the options and the cost of those options, and we accepted their analysis.
Is Whenuapai going to become redundant at some point?
Well, we've still got C-130s, Sea Sprites and Boeing 757s operating there. I think it'll be in operation for decades to come yet, but eventually, if you look at the growth of the population and where the housing is, we will have to look at its safe operation, because we can't extend the runway. That's the biggest issue, the length of runway and the size of aircraft that can operate out of there. The Poseidons will be delivered and begin operations from 2023. The capital costs will be spread over a number of financial years out to 2026. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's coming up to 17 minutes past 6. Tauranga iwi are pushing for a formal investigation into claims that a local Maori leader abused children before he died. The allegations were made against the late Te Awinui Arangi Black by his widow Anihira Black in a video posted on Facebook at the weekend. That video has now been viewed more than 300,000 times. Pō Roto Narepo grew up with Mr Black, knows his children in the whānau well, and says the past few days have been really tough and painful. He told our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin that Mr Black's Ngāti Pukenga want to get to the bottom of the allegations.
You know, this is about justice. This is about, you know, if Awa has done wrong, yes, he should be made accountable. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I've known Awa since he was 12 years old. He's my best friend. I knew him to the time he took his last breath. I buried him. And in that time, this is honest truth, I have never, ever known Awa to have that type of negative attitude towards children in terms of pedophilia or what he's been accused of. It's just, I don't understand why that's been the issue in terms of what I'm saying. However, that's fine. That's your view. And I'm hoping that if there are victims, that we can support them. I think we need, to anyone that comes forward in terms of issues like that is very brave.
The police have said that they are looking into it, but wouldn't confirm a proper actual investigation into these allegations. Well,
I know we're going to request that there is a police investigation. The difficulty is that Awa is deceased and dead. It's easy to say the allegations against someone when they're dead. How can they speak for themselves when they aren't here? And if, I'm just going on what was communicated in Facebook, if it was true, and only saying that it's been happening for years and years and years, why didn't she come forward before this? 26 years she's been married. I mean, why didn't she come forward and tell people then? Why wait until 18 years after his death?
And so you'll be hoping to put those questions to her then, in your own time?
I want to. I want to talk to my sister. I love Annie. You know, I love the kids, and you know, I'm worrying about our children. You know, about the children and how that's having an impact on them too. You know, and if Awa has done wrong, yes, then there needs to be the appropriate things done. There's a lot of reaction, but we haven't found out the facts. There's only been one side of the story. But what about our side?
It's 19 and a half minutes past 6. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. British police have launched a full-blown murder inquiry after a woman who was exposed to the nerve agent Novichok died in hospital. 44-year-old Dawn Sturgis and her partner suddenly became violently ill last week after visiting Salisbury. Ryan Brooks from Reuters reports.
A British woman died on Sunday after being exposed to the nerve agent Novichok. That's the same substance that struck an ex-Russian spy in March. 44-year-old Dawn Sturgis was a mother of 3 and was exposed to the poison in Western England a little more than a week ago. It was only a few miles from where Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter were attacked with Novichok, but survived.
The staff here at Salisbury District Hospital worked tirelessly to save Dawn. Our staff are talented, dedicated and professional, and I know that they will be hurting too. They did everything that they could. We continue to treat one other individual who remains in a critical condition.
Police say the death of Sturgis is being treated as a murder. They're looking at how she and a 45-year-old man that media have identified as Charlie Rowley came across an item contaminated with the agent. It's a poison that was developed by the Soviet Union's military during the Cold War. Police are still trying to work out how the two cases may be linked. Authorities say there's no evidence the pair visited any of the sites decontaminated after the first poisoning. The attack on the Skripals sparked the biggest expulsion of Russian diplomats in the West since the Cold War era, with allies siding with Britain's view that Moscow was either responsible or had lost control of the poison. Russia hit back by kicking out Western diplomats. Moscow has denied any involvement in the Skripal case and has suggested British security services carried out the attack to incite anti-Russian hysteria.
That report from Reuters. Let's head home again, where local fashion designers have been left out of pocket in the wake of the closure of one of New Zealand's largest fabric wholesalers. Cooper Watkinson Textiles announced it would be closing its doors a few months ago. One designer has had to cancel orders she already had secured with retailers, while others have had to change designs at the last minute, undoing hours and hours of work and costing them money. Emma Hatton reports.
Wellington woman Desiree Turner turned her hand to fashion about 6 years ago. Working out of her spare bedroom, her label, Clothing by Desiree, has been steadily growing. She says local fashion has always been hard work, but it just got even harder with the closure of Cooper Watkinson Textiles.
They hadn't ordered a whole heap of things in because they knew that they were closing down, and so to try and reduce their liabilities and costs and things like that, there were certain fabrics which they just didn't order in, and unfortunately they didn't actually let me know, which made it a whole lot worse.
Mrs. Turner says a collection takes months of design work and planning, and the last-minute fabric no-show has thrown all that out the window.
I already had orders in, so I couldn't actually redesign anything because it was too late. The lookbooks had already been done, myself and the sales agent had already been out and taken orders, so the only thing that I could do was try and find an alternative fabric. I think there were about 3 retailers that I had to talk with and discuss things with, which might not sound like a lot, but for a small label like myself, I've only got 6 or 7 retailers, and so that's a lot of retailers to deal with.
She says she's definitely lost money this year.
Cash flow wise, it's been really difficult because I took a hit from losing orders for this current season. Then I'm having to buy a whole heap of fabric up front, which means that the money is going out already, even though money isn't going to be coming in for probably a year type thing. So that's been quite a hit.
Another Wellington designer, Jessica Matthews from label Ada Maybe, had just received her last order from New Zealand's other major wholesaler, Charles Parson, which is also closing its fashion fabric service soon. She also wasn't told by Cooper Watkinson that they were closing until she went to confirm her order.
I'd done what's called a reserve, so it wasn't a firm order. I'd said, look, could you please hold 100 metres of each of these for me and I will get back to you. It's quite a standard way to do it. So I went and got back to them and said, when do you need to know what my firm order is? And then they said, oh, did you not know that we're closing down. I said, no one told me, so how would I know?
She says Cooper Watkinson told her if she wanted it, she had to buy it then and there, without sampling or even checking with retailers whether they would be buying what she made.
I did end up buying sort of maybe a third more than I needed. It was a massive outlay of money. I would have really liked to have not spent thousands of dollars on fabric that I didn't know if I wanted. But it was that or not get it at all.
Mrs Matthews says with smaller wholesalers now having to meet the New Zealand fabric demand, it's going to have a massive impact on her business.
Smaller wholesalers lose their major accounts. Can they stay open for people like me? Or does all of that volume now push onto these smaller wholesalers and then I get bumped right back down into the gutter again? So I'm just really trying to work out the path. There's so many unknowns. I really don't know what's going to happen.
The only certainty for both labels is that they will keep on battling to create unique New Zealand designs. RNZ was unable to reach Cooper Watkinson Textiles for comment. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
We had Clay Wilson in the studio talking about the World Cup, the Football World Cup earlier, and people are saying nice things about Clay. If you're listening, Clay, what a great job Clay is doing as the World Cup commentator on Checkpoint. He's knowledgeable, interesting and pleasant to watch and listen to. Congratulations. Job well done, Clay. Heather, who, like John, that's me, is a rugby enthusiast, but slightly turning. Yes, I've really been enjoying the World Cup. And we're not alone, Heather. You and I, lots of people are. World Cup fever's been going on for weeks now, and we're getting down to the real business end. Of course, England and Croatia, France and Belgium, they're the two semi-finals. Clay, by the way, picked, if you missed him, Croatia and France to go through to the finals. In all of the countries involved, football is huge, and many of the matches are scheduled during the working day because of Russia's time zone. The BBC's Tom Davey went to find out how employees or employers are trying to accommodate their die-hard footy fans.
From the parks of Paris to the concourses of Colombia, the ecstasy and the agony. Wherever you are, it's been hard to avoid the World Cup. And with so much going on in Russia, perhaps you can't be blamed for getting a little excited at the office.
They are through. And I think that means England are through. Okay,
but some businesses, like the print and design company Moo.com, have been trying to combine work and play by setting up dedicated viewing areas.
We've got the football on the rooftop terrace here and in the offices downstairs. We give people the freedom and choice to spend time how they want, to go with themselves or with their colleagues to watch the matches. We trust them freely. We presume permission. They have the right to go and treat and work their day as they want. They've got a job to do at the end of it, and we believe and know they will do that.
So while some offices have been able to make the most of the football, not every workplace has been able to tackle the problem head on. Researchers found that financial traders become distracted by the World Cup. At the 2010 tournament, which was played in a similar time zone to Russia, economists found that the number of trades at the country's stock exchange fell by an average of 55% when the home nation was playing.
Because we had very detailed data, we were able to make a link between what happened on the football pitch on a minute-by-minute basis, and we were able to link this to what happened on stock exchange. As elimination became increasingly likely for France and Italy in this case, there were negative reactions on the stock exchange in those two countries.
So as we reach the latter stages of the World Cup, for employees in many countries, client meetings have already taken the place of pub lunches. But for the teams still left in the tournament, workers are hoping that they can wait at least another week before it's business as usual once more.
The BBC Tom Davey, BBC's Tom Davey, we're hearing from lots of people saying how much they're enjoying the Football World Cup. It does make a difference. The four teams who are in the semi-finals seem to be playing the games in good spirit, don't they? None of this Neymar rolling across the ground when no one's even touched you, which is feeble and really is a blight on the game of football. But the four semi-finalists don't tend to do that stuff, or yelling and screaming at the referee over every decision like the Colombians were doing that game against Britain. By golly, that referee had the patience of a saint. Anyway, it's fantastic, very exciting. And we'll talk to people about the games as the week goes on. We're hearing from people in Blenheim tonight, 101.7 FM, reception cutting out every couple of minutes. We've passed that on to our technical team, and we hope to get that. A few people telling us about that. We hope to get that sorted. And the purchase of the P8s, 4 of them, total cost $2.3 billion. Well, when we interviewed Ron Mark, there was overwhelmingly strong support, but in the hour and a bit since then, it started to swing the other way. Graham saying, hi John, re the new planes. If we invested somewhere around $2.5 billion over 5 years on diabetes type 2 with the express intent of being able to change people's eating and lifestyle choices, this would get rid of the unnecessary scourge. Would the savings from no longer required ongoing treatment of DT2 and the other diseases that trot along beside it fund the planes? Thanks, says Graham. Thank you all for your feedback. We love hearing from you when you text in on 2101. It's been a busy old night tonight. On behalf of the excellent and hard-working Checkpoint team, that is the program for this evening, but we do hope you join us again tomorrow night from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Air Force's ageing Orions are being replaced by 4 Boeing Poseidons from the US at a cost of more than $2 billion to replace. Pressure is building for an investigation into claims that a Maori leader, Te Awa Nui Arangi Black, was a pedophile and the ringleader of a child sex ring. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says 2 far-right activists should not have been banned from speaking in New Zealand. And 4,000 government workers have held rallies in 8 cities throughout the country campaigning for a fairer pay rise. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, Melody Thomas here from Bang, the podcast exploring sex, relationships and intimacy. In episode 7, casting off shame and embarrassment.
I was like, oh, no, haven't done that.
And moving hesitantly forward into sex positivity. Plus